Well, I signed up for this, and then I realized it was a full hour-long chat, so I did what any dean and husband would do. I turned to Leslie and said, "You're helping me."
This is right after an hour.
And she said gladly.
Well, what I want to share with you, when you go into any Barnes & Noble, you see a lot of leadership books, right? Somebody successful wrote a book, and they have to tell you the way they did it, and if you do it the same way, it'll be successful for you. So I don't want that to come across like that, but I'd like to just share a few experiences and maybe hints and tips and thoughts to generate discussion, and this could be something that could continue. In fact, Matthew, you know what we ought to do? We ought to set up hashtags for these so we can all tweet about it afterwards and learn from each other through social media. That might be a great idea. But, well, anyway, before arriving here, I was at Northern Virginia Community College for 2 years. And I was at the Alexandria campus, which was the second largest of their 6 campuses. About 17,000 students by head count, about 7,000 by full-time equivalents. I was one of two of the academic deans, 72 full-time faculty, 200 adjuncts, and six administrative assistants, by the way. So life was pretty good, but very hectic. But it was my first foray into community college, and I went in with the assumption that community colleges would be top-notch at instruction because they have no bogeys for publications or research. It's all about teaching, and a full load for them is 15 hours, 5 courses a semester. And many of them will teach over the summer, although they accrue extra income because that's above and beyond their 9-month contract. And then quite a few of them go into overloads as well. I had some faculty teaching as much as 40 to 45 hours in 2 semesters. So I had a lot of great faculty who loved to teach, but I was surprised that lecturing seemed to really dominate still, and there wasn't all that much educational technology. I mean, they had the usual things like we have in our classrooms, the computers, the overhead projectors, the internet access, the wireless access points, but only just as Leslie and I were arriving, were they putting in smart boards, and we started to very aggressively engage the faculty in educational technology, but also collaborative teaching. And you have to understand that at most institutions, you don't pay as much deference to the deans as you seem to do here. And I often compare, you may have heard me say this, but a dean is often like a man standing in a graveyard, in the cemetery there among the tombstones. He's clearly above everyone else, but you know what? There ain't a soul listening to him. So we deans learn to use indirect levers and persuasion and discussion and process, which is very different from the environment I was accustomed to. But it was very important from a practical perspective that we actually broke from lectures and began to leverage educational tech and non-tech tools because the students expected it. Up in Northern Virginia, the high schools, all the way back into elementary schools, are flush with technology. Virtually every classroom has a smartboard in it, and the students in elementary school are using them, plus clickers and all kinds of other things. So they're coming to college with these expectations. And you can imagine a lot of our prospective students looking around the classrooms. I guarantee you some of them are looking for that and wondering how up-to-date we are with that. And then, of course, just like here in many of college classrooms, it tends to be very sterile. All the desks are in columns and rows. And it always amazes me how we teach creativity to our kindergartners, and they have these wonderful, colorful classrooms, just chock full of puzzles and toys and crafts. And as they progress up through the years, it moves to columns and rows and bare walls. And we wonder why we have to teach so much about creativity. But fundamentally, there's also a significance to moving towards collaborative teaching and leveraging technology where appropriate because of the new assessment. So along those lines, then you have outcomes-based assessment, and therefore a move towards a shared responsibility between shared responsibility of learning between the students and the faculty. No longer can the faculty merely stand on the stage as the sage on the stage, right, and lecture with the full onus of burden of learning on the student, and you then learn whether the student has learned at the first exam, say 3 or 4 weeks later. Often, at that point, it's too late to make corrections. The student either is headed towards a poor grade or they drop, and learning is curtailed in one way or another. Now, it's absolutely paramount that the instructors know in each lesson whether the students get it, whether they're learning it. So how do you do that? Lecturing at somebody doesn't tell you anything. You might be able to see how many folks are looking at you, how many eyes are open, how many heads are on the desk, any sort of other thing, but you really don't know if they've got it unless you actually engage the students in the classroom. And so it's absolutely paramount that we begin moving towards a more collaborative, project-based, open classroom. And oh, by the way, I like to say that if I, as a dean, expect faculty to exhibit that in a classroom, to engage their students, to ask for feedback, to allow the students to help shape the syllabus, and what's learned, and to teach each other as well, then we as administrators, for those in the room, we need to mirror that. We need to walk the talk. And as we deal with faculty and staff on the campus within the university, we need to be collaborative. We need to seek feedback and input, be it positive or negative. And understand that generally it's from your critiques where you grow. Your friends will flatter you, but it's everyone else who will tell you what's really going on that will cause you to pause, think, and readjust. Well, anyway, so there I was with the faculty, and quite a few of them had been teaching many years, and they kind of looked at me, and I started talking about collaborative teaching and educational technologies, and kind of quizzical, like, okay, this is the new guy, how long will he last before we wear him out? We've got to teach him, what ground truth is really like. And I got arguments like this. For example, my assistant dean for chemistry had been teaching for over 20 years, PhD from Rice in Houston, by the way. And Catherine, she tells you the way it is. She doesn't hold back. And she basically said, look, Dr. Bowman, my courses all have to transfer to the 4-year colleges. If they don't, I'm dead. And I don't have time for this silly stuff. I have to just get it out there, and it's up to the students to learn it, and the good ones are going to learn it and move on, and the other ones, well, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm constrained by time. I don't have time to learn this. You're going to have to show me how to do this. You're going to have to prove to me that this is worth my while. Then I had Tatiana Stancheva, who comes from Romania, where she got her degrees. My assistant dean for physics, a wonderful, lovely lady, about 40 years old. But she had come through a very disciplined Romanian background where you sit down in class and the professor lectures, and there isn't much give and take in the classroom, very formal. And so she had never really thought about teaching any way else, so a lot of the topics I was bringing up were quite foreign to her. Nobody had brought these to her attention. And she'd only been teaching probably 6 or 7 years, so not really a veteran teacher. So, and then I had other folks, who had been around the block for a long time, and some of them came over, and some of them kind of sort of didn't. But, for example, a geology class, you have an app where you've got the seismometer, and the iPad will register motion in all 3 planes. And so the instructor was able to do that, bump the table and cause vibrations in order to show and teach the students with that. We also had Wolfram math apps, and we had biology, anatomy apps, and faculty started checking those out. In fact, one of our math instructors, about 70 years old, 771, had been teaching forever, was 2 years from retirement, tried it, and as well as student response systems, and used them heavily, and was even asking very technical questions that I couldn't follow, but Leslie could. And then I had a physics teacher who was going on 75, one of these fellows that you're going to carry out of the classroom on a stretcher. That would be his retirement parade. Who found open source textbook built by Hewlett-Packard Foundation, Bill Gates Foundation, Rice. Beautiful textbook at no cost online, and he began to adopt that. So there were some marvelous things happening. And at the end, in my last 2 weeks there, Tatiana came to me and said, you know, when you first got here, I was a no professor. I had no clue what you were talking about. I wasn't going to do it. But you know what? You turned me into a yes professor. We had to install extra boards in her classroom so that she could get the students up out of their seats at the boards working physics problems so she could circulate and look at their work and begin to understand their depth of understanding and make on-the-spot corrections to improve student learning. She was also looking to get Mediascape tables put into the classroom so the students could connect up their laptops and display their laptop screens onto a big screen so that they could, as a group, collaborate. Catherine Burton started having group quizzes. She started to flip the classroom where the students were expected to come in having read and understood the work and to engage in project-based learning. And she came to me and said, you know what? My attendance is up, my test scores are better, this stuff really works. And so I can speak from experience there. Basically, what we did was we found by hook and crook funding to acquire technologies like the iPads and clickers. I resourced as much as possible to include from the provost and college funds funding for the faculty to send them to conferences and workshops for professional development, where they could rub elbows with veteran faculty who had tried these procedures from which they could learn hints and tips and success stories, as well as just get a better understanding of things. And then, of course, walking around and sitting in on classes and observing things and then connecting with the faculty afterwards. I was also sneaky in that I had monthly luncheons with my new faculty, and I had 8 to 10 new faculty every year. And we did things the first couple of months discussing with students. You know, what are millennials like? What are the learning behaviors and characteristics of all of the generations? Because we had students all the way up into their 60s, even 70s, coming back to community college. We looked at cultural differences because we had students from about 120 nations on this one campus. And so as a female instructor, how do you deal with the Middle Eastern student who is accustomed to learning from male instructors and doesn't believe a woman's place is in front of his class? What do you do? And then we would go into teaching methods, teaching technologies. And so these new faculty, some of whom were veteran teachers who were just transferring, would come out of that excited, and I would ask them to do things such as, I remember one of my biology professors had been teaching for well over 10 years, was new to us, and I asked them all in January to use icebreakers, different exercises, little games where they had to learn each other's names and learn a little bit about each other. And she was shaking her head, didn't really want to do it, but she knew that they would have to report back. And she said, you know what? I'm always going to do it. I can't believe how engaged my students were in that first week of class. Normally they sit there like couch potatoes, like they're half asleep, and we're just going through the motions. The syllabus and the lab rules and the basic introductory chapter, and everybody's just kind of waiting me out to get that out, knowing that the second week things are really going to get rock and rolling. She said they were so engaged that first week, and she had 5 classes to try them out. And we also did some experimentation. So Leslie's going to share with you some technologies But experimentation, don't go whole hog. So if you're going to flip a classroom, flip a lesson or two. See how it goes. Don't put all that extra pressure on you. And if it goes well, try a little bit more maybe the next semester. Maybe only try it in one course, not all 3 or 4 that you're teaching. We had one fellow in business who tried, his first week we always had students registering late. So students were always coming into the second week. Very frustrating for a professor because they're having to catch people up now. And so Scott actually videotaped the first week of lessons and specifically videotaped himself going over the syllabus. Put it on Blackboard, so now students coming in late were expected to review those videos and make sure they understood the rules of the classroom and the course. With regards to chemistry, the way they started to think about flipping the classroom was to videotape laboratory exercises. So if they knew they were going to, the students were going to have to pipette, they actually did like a 5-minute video tutorial on pipetting. So, and then they also were working on one for lab safety in general. It allowed the faculty member to become familiar with the technology, to begin feeling comfortable in front of a camera, to begin feeling comfortable injecting this into the classroom. And same with the use of iPads, the smart board. Leslie was very good about this because the IT folks, sorry, I don't want to offend anybody. I'm sure it doesn't pertain here, Matthew.
It doesn't pertain here.
It doesn't pertain here. But the IT folks there were very good about IT, but they didn't have a good understanding about teaching. So just before I got there, as they were putting in the first 5 or 6 smart boards, they removed all the whiteboards from the front of the classroom and put in a smart board, which probably is as wide as this window. And the faculty member came in and, where's my whiteboard space? So, Leslie was very good educating the IT folks, so now we replaced a section of the whiteboard and then left all the other whiteboards to the left and the right, so the faculty members still had the freedom to put everything up there if they wanted to, and where appropriate, where they felt comfortable, they could use the smart board. So it was a trial and error experimentation and just finding champions, points of light, so to speak, working with faculty, demonstrating lessons learned and forward progress, and seeing some of the other professors that are looking over like, huh, that worked. Talking to them and then, trying it out for themselves. But I think, yeah, I'm going to do, so the basic thing is, this is not about just injecting technology for technology's sake, because then it becomes a toy. It's all about student learning, fostering student learning, but also being able to assess the student learning so you know where the students are. So you can both resource the student at the lower end of the bell curve, identify them, meet with them after class, as well as identify the folks at the top end whom you might give extra work to or extra materials and readings to in optimizing them. Or more resources or things to go to, because I often find that students who are really into the course want more, and they're going to go just read more, do more, check out the website. And so leading them, helping them to do that. I'll tell one more story. I had an accounting professor who was an adjunct, old hand, CPA, knew his stuff. I was starting to get a number of complaints from students about him, and then in doing a deep dive over the 5 years he'd been teaching there, over half of his students either dropped the course or got D's and F's. So I went to the faculty member, and he was very old-fashioned. He said, hey, look, I tell them what my office hours are. They know they can come see me. I don't understand what the problem is. It's up to them. The burden is on the student to come see me if they don't understand it. I don't know what more you expect of me. This is ridiculous, Dean Bowman. At which point, I have a conversation with him about his students. Do you know how many students we have from foreign countries? Do you understand that in some of these countries, they're not encouraged to talk to their professors. They are intimidated by you. Do you also understand that, particularly for maybe some of the female students, you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, there's some inhibition there as well. Do you also understand that many of our students are first in their family to go to college, so they inherently don't understand how colleges work. They don't understand the bureaucracy. They don't understand that if they miss a lesson, they can go to the professor to catch up, or that they can actually go to the professor to talk. And we had a conversation about that, and the light began to come on insofar as now beginning to assess and identify students, and then reaching out to them and sharing that burden of responsibility for learning, in that it's not all on the student, it's our responsibility as well. And so that case really highlighted it. In the end, unfortunately, that was not a success story. He resigned. You know, he was an adjunct, you know, near retirement age. He in the end decided he just couldn't change. It wasn't worth his while, and that was that, unfortunately. But anyway, so I think that's that. I want to go a little bit into collaborative teaching technique. Has anybody done Think, Pair, Share? Okay, some of you have. College professors generally aren't taught how to teach much. You have a PhD or an advanced degree to throw into the classroom, voila. It's kind of like the old notion that you can be successful if you have a high IQ. You now know there are other factors like high emotional intelligence. But what I'd like you to do is, on your own, for a couple of minutes, think about how you learned a new skill. One that you actually learned a long time ago, but that you still understand and still do. How were you introduced to it? How did you learn it? And why do you still remember it? So take a couple minutes, think about that, and then I'll ask you to pair up, or maybe we'll do trios here where we have tables of 3, and let you talk about it a little bit. Anybody at all? Something you learned and still remember, and why?
They're voting me.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Okay. Well, I was wondering why you were being so quiet.
When I was young, I used to watch my mom sew and became curious, and she taught me how, and I had to do it in order to actually learn this skill, and I still use it frequently.
There you go. So, valuable lesson in what Karen had to say, but this was just a demonstration of how to implement. You notice at the end, I didn't put anybody on the spot. I asked for volunteers. And this works very well, particularly for shy students, because they often are thinking they're the only one not getting it. And as soon as you pair them up, they may learn, oh, this person doesn't get much better than me. And now they begin to maybe get the courage to speak up in front of the classroom as well. Or as other group people speak up, they say, oh, that's me too, and they have to speak up. So it's a wonderful way. I observed, for example, a class death by PowerPoint where the faculty member would lecture and then ask a question. This was on health and fitness, lecturing about nutrition and exercise, and then they threw up a chart of like 5 reasons why you should exercise. Not that we really would need to tell youngsters that, they know it better than we do, but I was thinking, well, instead of throwing up the chart and just telling them 5 good benefits of exercising, why didn't they just stop and give that question to the class in a think, pair, and share format, and then they could have walked around, just kind of eavesdropped a little bit, and then listened to the feedback, and very quickly got an assessment of whether anybody had been awake and listening during the lecture phase. Another one, there are lots of techniques. Another technique I know Leslie's used a lot is jigsaw, where you might ask the students to form groups and each take a part of the lesson that was learned, or maybe a chapter of a novel. And then after they discuss and work things out, they take turns coming up and teaching what they've learned to the rest of the class. At West Point, contrary to the stereotypical image of a military academy, none of my department's classrooms were ever in rows and columns. Most of the time the tables were in clumps, and we had whiteboards on virtually every wall save for the wall with windows. And generally, if not every class, every other class, we had the cadets up at the boards. So we would introduce material that they were supposed to have read the night before, and then we put them at the boards, and generally it would maybe be a simple introductory problem, and then I would give them one that would extend their knowledge to see if they could do that, if they could start putting pieces together on their own. And then I would circulate, help them out, answer questions, and then they would brief each other out. This is how we did it. And just very, very, very effective. And just a wonderful way to teach. So, there are a number of techniques out there that don't require any technology at all. But Leslie's going to share with you some ways to leverage technology and share with you the benefits and the pros and cons of learning how to deploy technology to support you in the classroom.
Okay, educational technologies that can support collaborative learning. First thing is, I don't like to be tethered to a podium. I absolutely hate it. I like to wander around the classroom. In fact, if you're in one of my classes, I'm usually teaching from back of the classroom. So all of those students who were sitting up front, I'll come move up front because I was a front seat person, occasionally, but I often teach from the back of the classroom or the middle of the classroom, because then if I have a student who's had an interesting the night before preparing for another class or something else, and they're just kind of having a hard time paying attention, I can come find out, okay, is this person, where are they on Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is this somebody who needs to go sleep? They usually wake up when you're standing right next to them. Or do they need something to eat? Are they dying, they have a fever, you usually feel the heat radiate off of them and, help them out by that. But poor Emily is trying to crack me. So I'll come back up here. So different things that you can use in the classroom. There are student response systems. Most people call them clickers, and there's lots of different ways to do this. I know that the school business owns something called iClickers, which is in front of you. We're going to be using those shortly. There's also, if you have a lot of technology in the students' hands, i.e. they all seem to have smartphones nowadays, and they're willing to do it, because that's the first thing you have to do is check how they're paying for their text messages. You can use something called Poll Everywhere. And they text in their answers, and then you can save it, and you can use it to grade and all kinds of happy things. There is also iPads, tablets, the apps that come with them. The iPad itself doesn't do very much for you. If you ever got an iPad and it took it out of the box and it's kind of like, okay, what's the excitement about this? Great, it moves when I touch it. Now what? It's the apps that make an iPad useful. The same thing with tablets. Smartboards, I absolutely adore smartboards. I know we have one over in the School of Education. They are two. Okay. And they are a very good collaborative tool, getting people up and using them. And how many of you like to doodle? Anybody like to doodle in here? Anybody like to doodle in color? Smartboard's great for that. Okay, being able to work in color, being able to show somebody a process by using different colors, but making it digitally so that you can save it afterwards. One of the wonderful things about smartboards and things like that is you save your notes, your lecture notes, and you make it available to that student who was absent for an excused absence. Or you put it on Blackboard for them after the lecture. They can go back and they can say, wait a minute, I missed something. I was writing, I was paying attention to something else, I was thinking. What did they put up on the board at that point? Well, if you do it digitally, then you can keep it. When you write it on an actual dry erase board, so you either have to take a picture of it or write it down for them. So using that technology. Blackboard discussion board, when you're working with collaborative learning, getting them to discuss things with each other, put them in groups and say, all right, this is what you're discussing. Give them a theme, give them a topic, and let them go, but check in every once in a while. Make sure they don't go way off on some tangent that has nothing to do with what you needed them to learn, because sometimes they will. Daniel's going, Blackboard Wikis is fairly new. We do have the option of that in Blackboard 9.1. If you've heard of Wiki, not Wikipedia, okay, but a collaborative space where you can add things and work together. That would be a great way. And then we have Blogster and Speaking of wonderful technologies and how they work, Blockster is an interactive blackboard, bulletin, sorry. And always have a backup when you're working with technology or anything that you're doing. How many of you learn by doing things? I know I do. Blogster is a way that you can make what's called an interactive poster. So you put your students in a group and you say, these are the ideas that you need to get across to everybody. You figure out how to do it. They make a digital poster that's online that they can share with each other. But the neat thing is it's got the links and it's got a framework for it. And it's something you can post and make available to everybody else.
Is it free?
It is free for educators. And I'm a great fan of free. But we also have the option of, especially if you have an iPad, I can manipulate my my PowerPoint presentation from my iPad using something called Doceri. And it's very powerful, and I just learned how to use it today, so it can't be too bad. It's one of those, I've had it on my iPad for a while, but when the Doceri first came out, it wasn't exact. I'm not using it the way it was really intended to be used originally. And it's user error. It's me not having come into this room to make sure I'm familiar with the technology that's available. But those are some different ways that you can use this. So for clickers, on your table there's a lovely thing called an iClicker. You'll notice it has A, B, C, D, and E, and an on-off button. So we're going to try those in a couple minutes. These are great if you are polling and you're going to do true or false, multiple guess. Open-ended questions don't work so hard, don't work so well. Poll Everywhere is online. It's either free or paid, depending how many students you're working it with. And you need to have students who have iPhones or some way of texting. So they can do that from their iPads as well, but you need to check with them ahead of time.
They can do it on the internet also.
They can do it on the
If they have their
internet.
laptops and stuff.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. So Poll Everywhere is a less expensive way to do all this. Turning Technologies are the clickers that I had preferred at other institutions because they're extremely affordable when you get the refurbished ones. So it's something that you could use as a PowerPoint add-on, or you could use it as, if you had owned a set of Turning Technologies clickers, you could use their version of Poll Anywhere for free. And then if you have iPads, there's this thing called eClicker and the eClicker Host. eClicker Host costs $10, and it makes your iPad into a wireless access point for everybody who has an I tool in the classroom. So you can use that as for clickers if you happen to know that everybody's got an iPhone. And if you get an Android in there, all bets are off. Okay, so if you have something like an iPad cart, which is what we were launching, iClicker Host is a great way to send out student response systems without having to add to what they were carrying off out of the class, out of the IT. All right, so now we're going to try this. Checking for understanding, something you should do frequently in your class. Not every 5 minutes, you'll bore the heck out of your students and they'll catch on to what you're doing. But finding out if people are agreeing with you or if there's something that you need to go over again, etc. So if you will turn on, let's see, I got to start something first. Always helps. All right, what do you accomplish by using a clicker in the classroom? I got to participate in a wonderful conversation earlier about being shy as you grow up. Okay? I was very shy as I grew up. My high school yearbook had you know how they make the comment about everybody, you know, most likely to succeed, most likely to do this. Mine said most likely to look like she's about to be hit if you talk to her. Okay? So I was not a person in a classroom that readily participated. Obviously, I overcame these. Yeah. God is good. But if you have students in your class that are shy and aren't participating, clickers are a great way to get them to participate. There is safety in looking at this thing and touching a button. Because nobody, you know, I don't know who answered C. I don't know who answered E. So I can do that, especially if I don't understand and I don't want to admit I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay? So clickers are a great way to engage your students. The other thing you may notice is nobody monopolized the conversation. Of course, you're counting me. Okay? So that's a good way to get everybody to participate. All right, let's see if I can manipulate a mouse and I can do.
You can change your entry. See what I'm changing mine to C and E.
Okay. And the cool thing about the iClickers is if I had set this up through Blackboard, which I did not because I don't have the Blackboard course, that I can do this. Okay. I could save this and I could have a quick assessment. All right. If that was how I chose to use the survey. Let's go on to the next one. Did you know that you can overstress a computer? There you go. All right. You have the idea with the iClickers. How many of you were at the wonderful thing last night where they used a different kind of clicker? All right, a great way to get lots of people involved. All right, now we're going to do the text one. This one is for wonderful and exciting poll anywhere, so let me get rid of my results over here. So if you want to participate, you don't mind using a text, you text a code to the number 37607, that would be me, and then you type in as a message, you type in your response. So, using a survey could be used to guide, or using the results of the survey could be used to guide my teaching. It could be used as a quiz grade and exported to Blackboard. It could be used to encourage students to participate. It could do all of the above. Okay, we got 6 people who wanted to participate. Anybody not?
Some of us are slower than others.
That's all right. No, that was the next question because it does take some practice. The first time you use this, it takes a bit.
It told you to vote again?
So some questions for you. How could this be used to guide your teaching? How could you use a quick survey right before break to guide your teaching? What could your questions be? What was the, the first half of your class? What were you actually meeting the students? What was your student outcome that you needed? Can they do that? So if you were in a math class, can they add 2 + 2 and get 4? So give them a problem that uses that. With Poll Anywhere, everywhere, sorry, I keep saying anywhere. Poll Everywhere, you can put in math symbols. There's wonderful YouTube type tutorials that tell you how to do that. But you can get, you can put up a wonderful and exciting problem and have them answer that. That can be their ticket out of the room and to go get on the break. And in the meantime, if you do this digitally and you have the digital capacity to grade it so that you're not sitting there going, all right, 3 by 5 cards, pile. Okay, but you've got it right there, and if you know who the answer came from, you can figure out how to do that, then you kind of know, okay, did they get it? Do I need to go over it again? Are we ready for the next step? Because your teaching should build on whatever the skill was before. Right? So you can use polls for things like that. Okay. iPads. I mentioned eClicker host and eClicker. How many people in here have an iPad? Okay, about half of us. Are you familiar with an app called Flipboard where you make a personalized magazine? And your personalized magazine can have things in it like Mind Shift, which is a wonderful, what would you call it? Journal articles.
Publication.
Yeah, publication about the brain and teaching and how it works, and best practices and how to use all these wonderful things that you're learning in the classroom. So if you are not familiar with that, that's available through Flipboard. But you can also do things like put the Smithsonian in there. You can call, they have a special one that is just on apps that are available. You can do apps for education. Basically, you call up and it refreshes every time you're in a wireless system. So it refreshes every so many minutes. And so you're getting the latest news that's out there, but you can also look back. But it's a wonderful site if you are not familiar with that. Another personalized magazine that you can create is with Zite, Z-I-T-E. This one does basically the same thing as Flipboard, but it's pulling from different databases. So you get different kinds of articles. And they're lots of fun. And you can sit there, if you have an iPad and wireless access, you can sit there, going through and looking and saying, okay, how can I use this? With Flipboard, also look at things like we downloaded the Dallas specialty. So we can find out what's available in Dallas and get the news about, okay, these are the happenings in Dallas this weekend. And take a look at it and go, oh, yes, no, yes, no. Educational apps, there are all kinds of educational apps in there. There's a Smithsonian app for history professors who want to get to primary sources. There is Wolfram Alpha if you are teaching math. They have all the different levels. There is, if you're teaching biology and you happen to be teaching about leaves and stuff, there's Leaf Snap to help you identify the different leaves, or if you just move to an area from a completely different region and you have no idea what these trees are. Leaf Snap is a wonderful thing, and you go, oh, look, it's a live oak. How neat. What was that one? Leaf Snap. Mind maps, creating concept mapping or systems thinking where, this particular thing is your major idea, and these are the different ideas that go into it. So if you're into teaching people how to write and you're used to using something called inspiration, Mindomo is the same thing as inspiration, only it's free on an iPad. Or if you're trying to do systems thinking where you're trying to think of all the different things that affect a system and all the inputs and outputs and all those funny things. Yes, absolutely.
Process.
So process mapping. There is a Panopto app for an iPad. So if you are exploring using Panopto, because we have access here to the videos, and you want to either view one or you want to make one, the challenge with the app as it stands right now is if you use Panopto and you come over to CDT to use Panopto And they got the different videos, and they can show, you know, what's on your board and what's here and what's there, and have up to 3 things open at the same time. That's not available on your iPad. You just have to use it. So if that's what you want, it's a great app to use. If you want to be able to show your slides and connect it with what's on your desktop and connect it with what you are doing at the moment, then please continue to use CBT or a bunch of video cams. Okay, those are your channels. There's also a Blackboard app. Now the Blackboard app is really nice, except you can't get, well, last time I checked, you couldn't get into your book. You still can't? And that's probably got a lot to do with wireless and stuff. But I have had professors who just really enjoy being able to read the discussion boards, post quick announcements on the fly, things like that. So it's very useful for that. iPads in the classroom, you know, as Bruce said, we had carts that you could wheel around. That's a really expensive way to go, because you have to have somebody who manages the system. The iPads are have specific apps for particular classes. So we had the liberal arts one, we had the ESL one, and we had the science, technology, and business one. And you couldn't mix them. So if you showed up for the wrong cart or at the wrong time, that didn't work out so good. So that's not something I would do again. Okay, so educational technology and using wonderful things like clickers and everything else. These are tools, okay? They're just tools to get buy-in from the students, to get them to pay attention, to get them to let you know what they're thinking, to make your life a little bit easier when you're working with assessment. Bruce mentioned the math professor who was in her 70s that decided to use our clickers. She actually gave tests in calculus using clickers. Because what she did is she had the paper copy that the students would fill out so that she could check their work. But then when you learn to use the clickers, you can actually make it so that the students can do their work on the clicker, depending on the clicker. Because clickers won't do it.
And you could identify the student with the response.
Yes, and each student was assigned a particular clicker, and they had to put the number of the clicker that they used. But everything went right into a CSV file, which would go right into Blackboard, and she would have her grades. And then she'd go back, if the student came back and said, I think I got that one kind of right, she had the paper copy to go back to, or she could go to the paper copies just to take a look and see what they were thinking and how they were doing. So it was a lot of, she had a blast with it. And her students had a blast with it. They were much more engaged. And that was the big thing, was getting that student engagement, getting that student involvement. If you've ever been to a conference and had something introduced to you, like you came today and you got introduced to a whole bunch of stuff, and then you go away and a week later and you forget it all because you didn't get to practice with it, okay? Your students sometimes feel like that in your class. They're like, that was really great. I'm so glad I know that now. I don't really know that. So the engagement, the collaborative learning is to get them to use it right then. Bruce mentioned flipping the classroom. That's another way to get them to use it right then. They watch the lecture from home, the introduction from home. If you do that, I make recommendations like have something happen in the background, and then when they get there for the next class, your quiz, your attendance quiz using clickers, is what wandered behind me when I was talking about the logo. And you got to make it obvious, You've seen the one where the gorilla comes through bouncing the basketball and goes off and stuff. It's got to be a little more obvious than that, okay? The gorilla has to speak or something. But it's a way to flip that classroom. Yes?
You probably have not had to take defensive driving online in the state of Texas, but they do that very same thing. It'll be something like, because if you try to fast forward, not that I would know, not necessarily from experience.
That's right.
A friend told me.
Leslie, you should go get a speeding ticket in the name of
Sorry?
education. In the name of education, you should go get a speeding ticket.
No, because then I can't drive students anywhere.
You can't fast forward through, back when they were VHS tapes, you can't fast forward through it because
Right.
it's.
We're going to talk later.
Was it a friend that happens to commute from Tyler?
No, Liddell.
So I'm curious, out of the different things, I mean, when we talk about disruptive technologies in education, the pencil was a very disruptive technology, moving from slate to a pencil and paper was a big thing. It was the end of education as we know it. And the same thing happened when they came out with actual blackboards that they put on the walls. You know, again, the people who were currently teaching at that time thought that that was going to end education. Now we're, you know, introducing, you know, oh goodness, when the typewriter came out, oh my. Well, now we've got another tool, and so I'd like you to consider educational technology as a tool. Learn about the different tools that are out there that make your life easier, make it more fun for the student, and then use the tools. Please don't go away from here going, oh, I've got to use clickers, because the dean said so. So now I got to use clickers. Great. Instead go, you know what, I really would like to have a really quick assessment for my students without having to look at all the 3-by-5 cards and find out what they thought, or grading and sending things through a Scantron. How else can I do it? Oh yeah, there's this thing called clickers. I could do that. Oh, I don't have clickers. Well, okay, then I'll go for poll everywhere. And I can do it that way, because I already saw my students sitting there texting each other going, okay, where did you find this information? Does that make sense? Yes.
I have a question for you. And because of the technology, I know you didn't have all of this. Did you feel more connected from the teaching perspective? Because while you're walking around the room teaching, I'm watching, and other people are doing this, or he's over here, you know. And do you feel like from the teaching perspective that it breaks your concentration with those students because they're not focusing on what you're saying, but they might be.
Not
Whether it's the
necessarily,
clicker
because I'm assuming they're actually doing something that has to do with the class. They're either looking